Chapter 25, Southern Africa, Section 2. We're going to look at the history and culture. Bantu farmers migrated from West Africa to Central Africa as early as 2,000 years ago. These peoples also migrated to Southern Africa at about the same time. Much later, Europeans arrived on the coast of Southern Africa and forever changed the landscape and ways of life of the people in that region. For many centuries, the Khoisan peoples lived in southern Africa, divided into several ethnic groups. The Khoisan were hunter-gatherers and herders. When the early Bantu peoples migrated from West and Central Africa, they brought new languages and iron tools. One Bantu group, the Shona, built an empire that reached its height in the 1400s. The Shona Empire included much of what is now the countries of Zimbabwe and Mozambique. The Shona farmed, raised cattle, and traded gold with other groups on the coast. The Shona are best known for Great Zimbabwe, their stone-walled capital. In fact, the name Zimbabwe is the Shona word for stone-walled towns. The builders of Great Zimbabwe used huge granite boulders and rectangular blocks of stone to build the capital's walls. Founded in the late thousands, Great Zimbabwe was a small trading and herding center. In the 1100s, the population grew and both gold mining and farming grew in importance. Great Zimbabwe may have had 10,000 to 20,000 residents. With these resources, the city eventually became the center of a large trading network. Trade made Great Zimbabwe's rulers wealthy and powerful. However, in the 1400s, the gold trade declined. Deprived of its main source of wealth, Great Zimbabwe weakened. By 1500, it was no longer a capital and trading center. Archaeologists have found Chinese porcelain and other artifacts from Asia at Great Zimbabwe. These artifacts suggest that the Shona traded widely. In addition to trading with people of Asia, the Shona apparently traded with the Swahili. The Swahili were Muslim Africans living along the East Africa coast. In effect, all of these peoples were once connected by an Indian Ocean trade network. Europeans in Southern Africa. In the late 1400s, traders from Portugal explored the Southern Africa coast on their way to Asia to trade for spices. To get to Asia from Portugal, they had to sail around the southern tip of Africa and then cross the Indian Ocean. The trip was long and difficult, so they set up bases on the southern African coast. These bases provided the ships with supplies. The Dutch, other Europeans, arrived in southern Africa after the Portuguese people. People from the Netherlands, or the Dutch, were the first Europeans to settle in the region. In 1652, the Dutch set up a trade station at a natural harbor near the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape sits at the tip of Africa. The land around the Cape lacked the gold and copper of the interior. However, it had a mild climate similar to the climate the Dutch were used to back home. The small colony on the Cape provided supplies to Dutch ships sailing between Dutch colonies in the East Indies and the Netherlands. The Dutch eventually brought in slaves from the region and Southeast Asia to work in the colonies. The Afrikaners and the Boers. The people of the colony were very diverse. In addition to the Dutch, other Europeans also settled on the Cape. Dutch, French, and German settlers and their descendants in South Africa were called Afrikaners. Over time, a new language called Afrikaans emerged in the Cape Colony. This language combined Dutch with Khoisan and Bantu words. German, French, and English also influenced the language's development. In the early 1800s, Great Britain took over the area of the Cape. The Boers, Afrikaner frontier farmers, who had spread out from the original Cape Colony, resisted the British. Many Boers packed all their belongings into wagons and soon moved farther east and north. The Zulu and the British. At about the same time, a Bantu-speaking group, the Zulu, became a powerful fighting force in the region. They conquered the surrounding African peoples, creating their own empire. When the Boers moved north of the Cape, they entered Zulu territory. The two sides clashed over control of the land. Eventually, the British also wanted Zulu land. After a series of battles, the British defeated the Zulu. The ending of slavery in the British Empire in the 1830s brought changes to the economy of colonial settlements in the region. Instead of slaves, people traded ivory, the tusk of elephants. Over time, however, hunters wiped out the entire elephant population in some parts of southern Africa. With ivory in short supply, trade shifted to diamonds and gold, which were discovered in South Africa in the 1860s. Apartheid. In the early 1900s, South Africa's government, which was dominated by white Afrikaners, became increasingly racist. As a result, black South Africans opposed the government. To defend their rights, they formed the African National Congress, or ANC, in 1912. However, the trend toward racial division and inequality continued. South Africa's government set up a policy of separation of races, or apartheid, which means apartness. This policy divided people into 4 groups: whites, blacks, colored, and Asians. Coloreds and Asians were only allowed to live in certain areas. Each African tribe or group was given its own rural homeland. These homelands generally did not include good farmland, mines, or other natural resources. Those resources were owned by the whites, and blacks had no rights in white areas. Housing, healthcare, and schools for blacks were poor compared to those for whites. Schools for coloreds were poor, but slightly better than the black schools. During apartheid, many blacks found work in white-owned industries, mines, shops, and farms. Blacks had to live in separate areas called townships, which were often crowded clusters of tiny homes. The townships were far from the jobs in the cities and mines. Independence. Beginning in the 1960s, many colonies gained independence from the European countries that had once colonized them. Some gained independence rather peacefully, but others struggled. For example, the British colonists in Rhodesia fought native Africans for years. Fighting broke out after the colonists declared their own white-dominated republic in 1970. Finally, in 1980, the Africans won independence and renamed their country Zimbabwe. Independence also did not come easy for other countries. Despite violent resistance, Namibia continued to be ruled by South Africa until 1990. Mozambique was granted independence in 1975 after 10 years of war against Portuguese rule. The people of Southern Africa belong to hundreds of different ethnic groups. Some groups are very large. For example, about 11 million people in South Africa are Zulu. Nearly 1.6 million of Botswana's 2 million people belong to a single ethnic group, the Tswana. Other ethnic groups are small and usually not native to Africa. For example, about 6% of Namibia's population is of European descent. In Madagascar, people are a mix of 18 small ethnic groups. These Malagasy groups descended from people who migrated across the Indian Ocean from Indonesia. Languages. Because people in Southern Africa belong to hundreds of different ethnic groups, they speak many languages. Most of the African languages spoken in Southern Africa are related to one of two language families, Khoisan or Bantu. The early peoples of Southern Africa spoke different Khoisan languages. Khoisan speakers are known for the click sounds they make when they speak. Today, the majority of Khoisan speakers belong to the San ethnic group and live in remote areas of Botswana and Namibia. Most people in Southern Africa speak one of the more than 200 Bantu languages. For example, most of South Africa's 11 official languages are Bantu languages. In countries with European influence, European languages are also spoken. For example, English is the official language of Namibia and Zimbabwe. The official language of Mozambique is Portuguese. Religion. In addition to language, Europeans brought the religion of Christianity to Southern Africa. As a result, millions of people in Southern Africa are Christians. In Namibia and South Africa, the majority of the people are Christian. Many people in Southern Africa who are not Christian practice traditional African religions. Some of these people believe that ancestors and the spirits of the dead have divine powers. In Zimbabwe, traditional beliefs and Christianity have been mixed together. About half of the people in Zimbabwe practice a combination of traditional beliefs and Christianity. Celebrations and art. Southern Africans celebrate many holidays. On Heritage Day, South Africans celebrate their country's diverse population. Most countries in Southern Africa celebrate their country's Independence Day. Many Christian holidays, such as Christmas Day, are also celebrated throughout the region. Southern Africa's art reflects its many cultures. For example, South African artists make traditional ethnic designs for items such as clothing, lamps, linens, and other products. Artists in Lesotho are famous for their woven tapestries of daily life. Artists in Zimbabwe are known for their beautiful stone sculptures of birds and other animals. Traditional crafts of Botswana include ostrich eggshell beadwork and woven baskets with complex designs. People there also produce colorful wool rugs.